Nobody knows exactly where he came from. That is not an oversight. It is the first thing you need to understand about him. The silence around his origins is not a gap in the record, it is the record. In the world of Brawl Stars, where every brawler comes attached to a name and a backstory and a place in the social architecture of Star Park, Crow has none of those things. He appeared. He was there. And the fact that nobody can explain how or why is, in its own way, a more complete portrait of him than any biography could offer. The game's own description of him contains exactly one sentence worth of information. This enigmatic creature just appeared in town one day, and nobody dares to ruffle his feathers. Not anymore. 22 words. For a legendary brawler who has been in the game since the original beta launch, who has outlasted redesigns and balance changes and entire seasons of content, 22 words is almost insultingly sparse. But spend enough time with Crow, watching how he moves, thinking about what his mechanics actually do, paying attention to the small details of how other brawlers position themselves when he's in the room, and you start to understand that 22 words is not a limitation. It is a choice. Supercell gave Crow exactly as much explanation as Crow would have wanted, which is to say, almost none. So you build the picture from what's there, from the poison, from the positioning, from the way he exists in relation to everyone around him without ever quite being part of what they're doing. Start with the poison, because the poison is everything. It is not a weapon he developed or a skill he trained. It is his biology. The green glow at the tips of his daggers is not applied, it seeps. It comes from him the way cold comes from ice, not as a decision, but as a physical fact of what he is. And the thing the poison does, the specific, precise thing it does beyond the base damage, is block healing. Not deal extra damage, not slow movement. Block healing. His toxin enters a target system and closes off the exit. The target is not necessarily going to die immediately. They are going to find that their ability to recover has been removed, quietly, from the inside, and that the window for reversing the situation is already shrinking. If you were designing a character from scratch and you wanted their weapon to reflect their inner life, you could not do better than that. Because before Star Park, before the arenas, before the roster, before any of it, Crow lived in a world that specialized in removing exits. Not through hostility. Hostility would have been easier to deal with. Through the quieter and more persistent mechanism of spaces that simply did not accommodate him. He would enter a place and the place would work fine, technically, and nothing would be said. And yet, somehow, the distance would appear anyway. The small adjustments in how people position themselves relative to him. The particular stillness that falls when something unknown is present, and nobody wants to be the first to decide how to handle it. He was not rejected, he was made peripheral, which is a more durable form of exclusion because it never becomes a grievance you can point to. He dealt with this the way organisms deal with environments that don't suit them. He adapted. He found terrain where being peripheral was not a social condition but simply a physical one. Dark places, high places, the kind of landscape where the distance between you and everything else is just geography. He built a life that did not require other people to make room for him, and the skills that life demanded, patience, precision, the ability to read a space completely before committing to entering it, the instinct for high ground, became so fundamental to who he was that by the time Star Park found him, they had long since stopped being skills and had become character. The park found him the way it finds everyone, which is to say, obliquely. Star Park does not advertise. It surfaces in the peripheral awareness of people who exist at the margins, who have learned to listen to the frequencies that ordinary life ignores. Crow would have heard about it the way he heard about most things, not from a direct conversation, not from a flyer, but from a fragment, a reference, a piece of information not addressed to him that nevertheless landed. He would have filed it away. He would have waited. He would have assembled more fragments over time until the picture was complete enough to act on. This is how he operates. This is how he has always operated. What the picture eventually showed him was this: a place where what he was would be one item on a long list of anomalies, rather than the single defining anomaly in the room. A brawler who travels by rolling inside a barrel. A woman who opens dimensional portals between steps as casually as other people open doors. A man in a long coat who has built an entire persona around the proximity of death, who carries a shovel like a walking stick and moves through every space as though he is being watched and has made his peace with that. In that company, a creature with poison in his fingertips is not the strange one. He is simply another entry in the taxonomy of things that do not fit neatly into the ordinary world and have found, in Star Park, a place that does not require them to. He came at night. He watched the park from a distance before he entered it, long enough to map the light and the shadow and the rhythms of movement. Long enough to identify the exits. Old habit. You always know where the exits are. The lights were warm and orange and slightly too engineered to feel genuinely welcoming, and the sounds were slightly too curated, and the whole thing had the quality of a place that was trying very hard to look like something that happy places look like, which is not the same as being a happy place. He noticed all of this. It did not deter him. He was not looking for happiness. He was looking for a functional arrangement. What he found when he entered exceeded what he had expected, and he had calibrated his expectations carefully, so exceeding them was not a minor thing. The creatures inside the park moved around each other without that particular adjustment he was accustomed to producing in the people around him. They had the body language of entities that had each long since accepted the strangeness of all the others, not warmly, not enthusiastically, but as a baseline condition. The strangeness was baked in. It had stopped being information. He could enter a room here without the room reorganizing itself around his presence. That was more than he had encountered in most of the places he had spent his life. He spent the first days the way he spent time anywhere, high up, out of sight, watching. Rooftops, the upper structure of the Ferris wheel, the beams above the arenas where the sight lines were good and nobody thought to look. He was building a model of the place, how the arenas functioned, how the social structures worked between fights, which relationships were real and which were performed, who deferred to whom, and why. He was patient. He was always patient. This was not caution so much as methodology. You understand a place before you enter it. You understand an arena before you fight in it. You understand the people around you before you give them any information about yourself. The tall one in the long coat, Mortis, he would have identified quickly. Mortis is not difficult to identify because Mortis does not want to be difficult to identify. He has constructed himself as someone who is impossible to ignore, which is its own form of armor, and Crow would have recognized the logic of it immediately, even if it was not his own approach. Where Crow had spent his life becoming invisible, Mortis had spent his becoming unmissable. Two different answers to the same problem. If you are something that the world finds difficult, you either disappear or you make your difficulty so elaborate that it becomes impressive. Both strategies have costs. Mortis's cost is that he is always performing. Crow's cost is that when people finally notice him, the effect is often stronger than intended. The boy with silver hair was a different situation. Leon, young, restless, with the kind of energy that hasn't yet decided what it's for, had the ability to turn invisible, which made him theoretically a peer of sorts, a creature who knew how to exist in the space where others couldn't see him. The first time Leon tried to materialize suddenly beside Crow on a rooftop, stepping out of invisibility with the timing of someone expecting to produce a reaction, Crow simply looked at him. Nothing else. Leon faltered in a way that was almost endearing. The calculation of what to do when the expected response doesn't arrive, and then laughed briefly and disappeared again. It was probably the most honest exchange Crow had in Star Park in those early days. No performance, no adjustment, just two creatures who knew how to hide, acknowledging each other without having to explain anything. The arena came on the 5th day. Not because he had achieved some threshold of readiness, but because he had accumulated enough observations to have hypotheses worth testing. He lost the first fight, which was useful. The loss told him something he could not have learned any other way, how his poison behaved against opponents who were not afraid of it. Every time he had deployed his toxin before in his life, the reaction was fear. And fear makes people make bad decisions, retreat to bad angles, take bad positions trying to escape something they don't understand. In the arena, his opponent simply kept coming, absorbing the poison tick as a damage variable, working around it the same way you work around any damage in a fight. It changed the tactical problem completely. It also made him better, immediately, because it forced him to think about his poison as a mechanic rather than a reputation. He came back to the arena every day after that. What he built in Star Park over time is not friendship. He would reject that word with some precision. Not acceptance, which is too warm and too conditional. The closest accurate description is recognition, a stable mutual knowledge of what he is and where he'll be, and what it means when he occupies a particular position in a particular arena. The other brawlers know his name. They know his playstyle. They know that when Crow is in the bush at the far lane, the timing of the approach to the gem mine changes. That knowledge is impersonal, and it is durable, and it asks nothing of him beyond being consistently himself, which is the easiest and most natural thing he has ever been asked to do. In the forest, he was a rumor, a warning passed between travelers, something that existed in other people's stories as a reason not to go somewhere after dark. Here, he is a fact, a known quantity, a point on a map that other points have learned to account for. The difference between being a rumor and being a fact is not dramatic. It does not produce a visible change in how he holds himself, or moves through the park, or engages in the arenas. But it is the kind of difference that compounds over time, that changes the texture of existing in a place, that makes the space between the arenas and the gate at night feel inhabited rather than merely occupied. He goes to the gate sometimes at night, sits on the outer edge with the park behind him, and looks out in the direction where the forest is, where his territory is, where everything is still and familiar and fully his in the way that nothing here is fully his. He does not miss it with the quality of longing. The longing would require wanting to return, and he does not want to return. He misses it the way you miss the conditions that made you, with a kind of accurate grief that understands what those conditions cost at the same time as what they produced. The forest gave him everything he brought to Star Park. The patience, the instinct for high ground, the ability to exist in a space without needing the space to notice him first. He would not be what he is without all of that time alone, and what he is turns out to be exactly what Star Park needed on its roster, which is a thing he did not plan and does not feel sentimental about. The lights burn behind him, orange, slightly artificial, calibrated to the temperature of warmth without necessarily being warm. He will go back through the gate in a few minutes. Tomorrow the arena's open. Someone will come through mid-lane without checking the far bush. He will already be there, already still, already waiting with the patience of something that learned a long time ago that the most effective thing you can do in most situations is simply be somewhere before anyone thinks to look for you. He was one of the first 15 brawlers. He has been in Star Park longer than most of what Star Park has become. He has watched the roster grow, watched brawlers arrive with noise and spectacle and elaborate backstories, watched the park reinvent its own seasons and events and currencies around him. He remains. Not because he cannot leave, not because anything holds him here, but because he found a place where what he is costs him nothing, and you do not walk away from that. The forest is still out there. He looks at it one more time, then he turns back. He already knows his position.